Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The son of one of the victims killed in the Nottingham stabbings has described the failure to heed warnings about the attacker's mental health as a kick in the teeth. Thousands of civilians have been evacuated from a second Russian region after activity by Ukraine's forces. It comes as Ukraine accused Vladimir Putin of war crimes. An 11-year-old girl and her mother have been stabbed in Leicester Square in central London. Both survived their injuries and the attacker was disarmed by a security guard. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with political correspondent at Joe, Ava Santina Evans, and political commentator Benedict Spence. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Blood on their hands. The Daily Mail leads with the missed opportunities to stop Valdo Calacane before he stabbed 3 people to death. The Metro also covers that story, writing that a doctor warned that Calacane would end up killing more than 3 years before the Nottingham attack. The Mirror also leads on this story. Get a grip and fast, writes the Express, as they claim Labour is doing nothing to stop the boats. The Eye leads with UK plans to evacuate British nationals in Israel if Iran triggers war. The Telegraph also writes about the Middle East tensions and Sir Keir Starmer's warning to Iran over a possible attack. The Guardian writes that silent killer heatwaves in Europe claim 50,000 lives. Zelensky takes war to Putin, writes The Times. The Financial Times reports that Indian telecoms tycoon says swoop on Drahi's BT stake shows faith in Britain. And the Daily Star warns that there will be an invasion of angry German wasps. I wonder what they're angry about. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And tonight we're joined by Ava Santina Evans and Benedict Spence. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Daily Mail front page and their headline, Blood on their hands, and this, the families of those killed in that Nottingham attacks, I should say. Valdo Calacane's family has written a letter to the families of those who were killed, but they're saying, blaming the mental health treatment of Valdo Calacane, and the family saying that those institutions have blood on their hands.
Yes, so following the sentencing of Valdo Calacane, the family have released this 300-page document that essentially details, tracks his mental health over the past few years. You know, within this document, they talk about him being sentenced 4 times in the space of 2 years. They talk about him being able to lie to experts about hearing voices and being released, and, you know, a whole multitude of other issues that he had, and he was still allowed to roam free. And the saddest, actually, part of this story, the brother of, well, not the saddest part, I mean, sorry, there's a multitude, but Valdo Calacane's brother has been talking about how for years they believed that he would eventually take his own life, and they never conceived that he would do something this damaging. So the search is essentially on now. You know, people, the families of the victims are looking for culpability, and they're looking for answers. And so the Nottingham NHS Trust Chief Exec has come under fire. There have been questions about why that trust didn't perhaps raise the issue more prominently. There's also questions about the police who were involved in his sectioning. You know, I'm sure that a lot more will come out in the following weeks, but an inquiry will probably be called.
It is extremely worrying because there were so many warning signs, weren't there? And a series of errors, omissions and misjudgments in his treatment is how it's described, Benedict.
Yes, it's in many ways, it's sort of extraordinary that there have been relatively a small number of incidents where actually something particularly horrific like this has happened, because we often hear talk of a mental health crisis in the UK, and very often that's sort of seen through the prism of people who've got depression, people who are feeling suicidal. But actually the great sort of undercurrent beneath all of this is people with paranoid schizophrenia, people with psychosis, people with very serious mental health conditions who are effectively left at the mercy of a system that isn't fit for purpose. It isn't able to actually pick up the slack. There aren't enough qualified physicians trained in how to deal with this. There aren't enough beds. There aren't enough secure facilities for particularly dangerous people. There haven't been for a very long time, but actually over recent years, there's also been the slow shutting of certain facilities, a lack of beds, as numbers of people have gone up. There are various reasons why that is, certain things that are linked to different things, obviously things like poverty, things like drugs. You can sort of make lots of different links to various different conditions, but the key is that the system itself is creaking, and a lot of people are sort of just left to their own devices and only really become picked up by the state after they break the law. Often it's relatively minor things, a small assault, a little bit of, theft here or there, arguing in the street, and they're picked up by the police for things like being homeless, which sort of sounds a little bit kind of like, OK, well, that's a problem, but it's not a major one. But if people are sort of left to their own devices for too long, eventually they do become a danger to members of the public, they become a danger to themselves. And this is one of the great sort of unspoken issues that this country is facing. And it does go undetected because, of course, the primary victims are people who are very mentally ill and don't necessarily have recourse to raise the alarm about these things. And often the families, well, they tend to get ignored because they're not actually the primary concern in all of this.
Yeah, and the worry is how many people are in that situation, how many potential killers are there on our streets. The Metro saying that they knew for 3 years that Valdo Callicane was a danger.
And, this is going to be a huge question for Labour, because when we were leading into the election, there was a lot of talk from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, about improving mental health facilities. But it was sort of, it was top line, and I suppose it was a bit more of the quote-unquote fluffier end of mental health. It was, we're going to have counsellors in schools, and we're going to, there's going to be access for people into talking therapies. But actually, this case shows you that, we've always had this idea that perhaps we haven't been able to offer proper counselling to people, but if you were in extreme mental distress, you were always able to access care. And this proves that the system is not fit for purpose to even do that. And, in certain instances, you see people who've got violent mental health disorders being put into prison, where they are made worse and then they are released, and there is no physical way that they can be rehabilitated to be safe back on the streets.
There is a blurring of the line between criminality and mental health, isn't there? And we've seen now that many police officers are not responding to calls that perhaps it's because of mental health, because it's not within their domain.
Well, it's not within their domain, but it's sort of seen by other aspects of the state as, well, these are the only people with the resources to potentially go in and restrain somebody who is very disturbed, might become violent at any given moment. And I think Ava's right, it's very easy to talk about the softer end of the mental health issue, which is people who are anxious, people who are depressed, people who, actually they just need some relatively minor medication, you can send them on their way. There are a lot of them, but that is actually relatively easy to talk about, because ultimately it also tends to affect predominantly middle-class people who are in employment much more than other people. This sort of thing, this sort of category of person is a very difficult one to sort of get to grips with, because there are thorny questions about how you actually solve the issue. And something that lots of people would not want to admit is it's going to be very expensive and very difficult, because a lot of people will require, once you get to this sort of stage of psychosis, you require long-term institutionalizing. And that's not something that anybody wants to actively push forward and say, yes, we're going to be building lots of secure facilities so that we can lock people up for their own good. I mean, how on earth do you sell that to people, ultimately, when there's a shortage of however many other things? Putting people in prison because they break the law, it's not a good solution, but you can understand why successive governments have just gone, that can deal with that for the time being, in sort of a holding pattern.
We shall see how Labour does deal with the issue. Let's have a look at the Express, Ava, and erstwhile Home Secretary James Cleverly has a message for Sir Keir Starmer. Get a grip and fast. Labour's doing nothing to stop the boats.
Yes, so this follows, I believe it's the third highest day for the number of asylum seekers that crossed the Channel yesterday. It was around 700. The extraordinary part of this story, actually, is that 700 people travelled on 11 boats. So you could imagine how the overpacking of these people onto boats, I mean, is extraordinarily unsafe. And it's 2 people actually sadly lost their lives in the Channel overnight. So James Cleverly is talking about Labour and how they have eviscerated the Rwanda plan. The Rwanda plan that we recently found out was costing hundreds of billions of pounds, or projected to more than we first expected the cost to be. I believe yesterday he was asking Labour to reinstate the Rwanda plan in order to provide a deterrent. Today he's actually just talking about Labour getting a grip. I mean, it's rather questionable if you've had that long in government and you have actually been allowed to be Secretary of State and oversee the issue for the amount of time that he did, why nothing was done then and numbers weren't reduced during his tenure. But perhaps Benedict can defend that.
Laying the blame at Labour's door.
How does one defend 14 years of Conservative government in which, they've every year say, we're going to get these numbers down, and, oh, look at that, they've gone up, and it's probably Labour's fault, even though they're not in power yet. Oh, we'll blame the lefty lawyers. It's one of those things where, I'm not going to sort of sit here and say, oh, everything's going to go fantastically under Labour, obviously, but they've only been in a month. Like, come on, you've got to give them a little bit of time to at least try to implement their plans. I don't see what it is that they plan on doing that is going to solve this. Just saying we're going to smash the gangs. It's a really nice soundbite, but these are incredibly deeply embedded criminal organisations that span the entirety of the world, everything from people smuggling to drugs. They are, they are not things that you can just snap your fingers and go, oh, we'll solve them. The Italian state has been trying to deal with that for decades, so I don't think that's going to work. However, nobody really thinks that Rwanda was ever going to work. Even as a deterrent, it wasn't really going to work effectively well. It was costing a huge amount of money. Again, it's one of those very thorny issues where if you want to actually get a grip on illegal migration, it will require very expensive, rather unpleasant solutions, probably involving putting people in prison or detention centres, which nobody wants to do because it's expensive, but that's going to be the solution. Either that, or, as the Labour Party are probably going to do, you need to speed up the process of allowing them to live in the country. And I suspect that is what they're going to do. Whether or not that goes down particularly well with the public, well, that's on them. And we'll find out, I suppose, in 5 years' time if the public think that's a better solution to the one that the Tories had however many years to come up with and then didn't implement.
I suppose that James Cleverly is wanting to be visible because he's running to be leader of the Conservative Party, so hence why he's on the front page, and that's exactly where he wants to be. Let's have a look at The Guardian. Spread of far-right hate is driving Labour MPs, it says specifically, off X, formerly known as Twitter.
Yes, so a couple of Labour MPs in response to the riots that engulfed parts of Britain last week. They say that they have, Elon Musk, who owns Twitter, he acquired Twitter about a year ago. He has been, providing some sort of inflammatory commentary on the UK, and these Labour MPs claim that actually that has spurred on
well, he said there'd be civil war, didn't he?
Yeah, well, I suppose it is rather inflammatory, isn't it? Yes, so these Labour MPs have now come off the site. They say this article actually points towards it being due to the hate that they're receiving, but actually it's also because a lot of Labour MPs now don't want to endorse a site that is run by Elon Musk. But the big question for Labour here will be one that actually Conservatives have had for a number of years and they never solved, which is regulating the tech industry, because right now the site is able to act, carte blanche essentially in the country, and it doesn't pay a huge amount of tax, and it also is not well regulated by our Department for Culture. So it'll be interesting to see if there's more intervention from Starmer in the coming months.
Benedict, do you think we're going to see more politicians leaving for those reasons, leaving?
I think they'll leave for a little bit and then they'll come back, which is what everybody who says they're going to leave X does, unless you're Donald Trump, who is the only person so far who's left and not come back. He's there, but he doesn't use it.
He has recently. He's back today.
Yes, that's true. Well, I suppose no time like the present. Now that all the Labour MPs are leaving, he's got a willing audience right there, who none of them can vote for him, obviously. But it's one of those where, it's a really easy topic to talk about clamping down on social media and, the problem is, if you're the UK or you're Europe and you try to enforce these laws on an American tech company, actually you've got very little power, unless you do just want to ban the thing, to actually police a lot of what goes on the site, unless you can get the US government to do that. Now, call me a bit cynical, but I don't really see what influence the British government or even the European Union has over Washington to say, your First Amendment, can you not use that anymore? You know, that's politically toxic for any American government.
TikTok, do you remember?
Because that's a Chinese company. That's the issue. Because this is an American company, I think that the United States will just allow it to keep running until somebody can come up with a better one, which people have tried, but thus far we can't actually break the shackles of this awful hell site that everybody absolutely loves to hate. So I don't think it's going to change anything.
OK, definitive answer there. Ava and Benedict, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up after the break, we'll have more of tomorrow's newspapers, including this from the Eye on the UK plan to evacuate Brit nationals in Israel if Iran triggers war. Stay with us for more on that and other stories.
So we carry out a survey called Bugs Matter every year, which measures the number of bug splats that you get on your car number plate. And last year we saw a 78% decline since 2004 in the density of bug splats people were getting. And we've seen this pattern of it's growing and growing and growing. But this year in particular, we haven't yet got the data through because the survey is underway. But everybody is just talking about not seeing particularly bees and wasps and butterflies. And a lot of that is down to the extreme weather we've had this year, the huge periods of wetness we've had, which is causing huge problems for most of our pollinators. The only things that are doing really well are slugs and snails. I mean, the overall declines are a number of factors. It's loss of habitat, it's loss of habitat connectivity, it's our use of chemicals like pesticides and herbicides, which are removing the food that might be there for pollinators to eat. And to an extent, climate change, and that is kind of how the weather has affected it. Our weather has become less predictable in this country. We're getting many more extremes of flooding, of rain, and also extremes of heat. And you know, our bugs are actually meant for a temperate climate, and they're not used to this kind of behaviour. So it's obviously bad news for them. So if we all did something in our backyards, you'd end up with an area about half the size of the Serengeti. So it is actually quite an important and a large area if we all got together and do something. So that's what we can do. We can all do a little bit for bugs, plant a few of the right plants. And even if you just live in a flat, if you can put a window box up, and I always say if you do that, plant herbs in it, let them flower. They're brilliant for pollinators, but you can also reach out the window and put something fresh in. So it's a win-win situation. But we really must do something, because without them, our current food that we enjoy will be disappearing. We'll be losing 8 out of every 10 of the wildflowers we enjoy in the countryside. We've got a beautiful blooming year this year with lots and lots of flowers out, but that's not going to be the case in the future if we lose the things that are going to pollinate them. That's why Bugs Matter is also really important, where people are just going out and measuring bug splats on their number plates. And the more people take part, the better the data that comes out of those kind of surveys are. And also, even if you're just doing a localized journey, we can start to build up a picture of what's happening in your town rather than just across the country as a whole, and maybe then learn where things are happening that are good.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, political correspondent at Joe, Ava Santina Evans, and political commentator Benedict Spence. Let's have a look at the Eye front page now. And this headline, UK plan to evacuate Brit nationals in Israel if Iran triggers war. This headline coming off the back of Sir Keir Starmer actually having a telephone conversation with the president of Iran, really imploring him to de-escalate the situation and more is not the answer, and it's not inevitable.
Yes, I mean, you'd hope, obviously, that the British government would have plans to try and airlift out British citizens in the event of very serious escalation in violence, although part of the problem with that is going to be that Britain will almost certainly be lending aircraft to the defence of Israel in that event. So would the Iranians or Hezbollah, who have far fewer restrictions, or the Houthis, who have even fewer, actually necessarily distinguish between a military aircraft and a military aircraft that's being used to airlift civilians out? I'm not so sure. If that's your concern, you probably should have already left, or in fact tried to shelter in place. But I don't think we're actually going to that point yet. I think that the Iranians have talked a big game on this, because obviously it's a slap in the face of what's happened, the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran. But the very act in itself is a challenge to the regime by the Israelis to the Iranians. It's saying, we can get you anywhere. It doesn't matter who you are. You can be the most important person in Hamas. You can be the president of Iran. We can strike you. And if we can strike you, we can strike your military installations. We can strike your nuclear facilities. And if we can do that, imagine what the US can do. And by the way, there are now carrier groups in the Mediterranean and the Gulf. So I think as much as the Iranians would love, obviously, to strike back, I do think that if there is a response, it'll have to be measured, because this is going to be about saving face. Iran can't win a war, ultimately, against the United States, against Israel, the UK, and the other Gulf countries there that have all said they're not going to take Iran's side on this, and that they will actually come to the defence of Israel. They can prevent an invasion. That's what their military is set up to do, to stop an invasion and an occupation. But an actual sort of aerial war, that sort of nature, I'm not really sure that the odds are in their favour. So I don't think we're going to see an escalation to full-scale war. Obviously, that's what we all hope doesn't happen. But obviously, these sorts of plans, they have to be in place for the worst-case scenarios.
And Ava, how much is Iran in control of factions like Hezbollah, though? I mean, are they really able to pull the strings completely, or might they act independently? Because they also have a gripe with their leader being assassinated.
Well, it would be rather, I mean, it would be unusual for Iran itself to launch a full-scale attack onto Israel. I mean, it's likely that Hezbollah, it would go via one of its proxies. I mean, I suppose if you... It just seems sort of rather unusual where this has come from with the US. I know that the White House has announced that we're sort of on a hairpin here, and we could have some kind of invasion in the next couple of weeks, or some kind of assault in the next couple of weeks. But it'd be very unusual for Iran to launch something like that. I mean, it'd be far more likely that you might see it come through via a proxy in Lebanon, via Hezbollah. It just... It seems rather out of character, and it does seem that potentially the US is almost escalating events by moving a submarine towards the Middle East. I mean, that does seem like a rather extraordinary escalation.
Yeah, that is. I mean, they've ordered the deployment of a guided missile submarine to the Middle East. I mean, if you don't interpret that as bellicose, I mean, what else is there?
Well, this is the point, though, isn't it? It's to say to the Iranians, look, you can try this, but it won't end particularly well for you. And, it's incredibly sort of grim to think about it in those terms. But ultimately, if you're talking about a country that is, ideologically set to the destruction of Israel, sometimes that's the kind of power that you need to demonstrate. I mean, on the subject of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah has been talking ever since October the 7th about what he and Hezbollah are going to do to the Zionists, to the occupiers, to the Israelis. It hasn't come because they still remember the last war against Israel, in which they did fight the IDF to a standstill in southern Lebanon, but they took huge losses. And the Lebanese people, forget Hezbollah themselves, the people of that country are in no fit shape to withstand another Israeli invasion. And I don't think Hezbollah potentially might not even survive as a political entity if the public turned around and said, you've brought this on us.
It's rather different now, isn't it, when you think about the capability that Hezbollah has now compared to what it had in the 2000s? It's a totally different...
It did, but again, Israel now has the capacity to use drone technology that it didn't have before. It doesn't even need to send the same sorts of troops that it did in the previous war. It doesn't even need to send aircraft over, but it's doing it over Beirut just to show that it can. So that's the difficult thing. Yes, Hezbollah has a huge military arsenal, but Israel's technology has kept pace with that as well.
Over to The Guardian and developments in the war between Ukraine and Russia. I'm talking about the incursions into Russian territory by Ukraine. Guardian speaking of euphoria and fear on the border.
Yes, so in the Kursk region, about 120,000 people have evacuated, and it's expected that another 60,000 will follow. Ukraine are now controlling an area that is around 40 kilometres wide, so it's the first sort of proper offensive since this conflict began a couple of years ago. But it is very surprising for the Russian people, and reportedly, apparently, the Russian state media is not not quite giving the full extent of the story. So they are quietly asking people to leave, but not giving away that perhaps this could be rather dangerous.
Benedict, you have about 20 seconds.
The irony of all of this is that Grigory Prigozhin, the former head of the Wagner Group, said some time ago that the border between the Kursk region and Ukraine isn't well policed by the GRU. Let me and my Wagner troops do it. And the Russian intelligence ministry said no. This was not unknown within certain Russian circles, but that's the nature of the Russian military. They're all at each other's throats.
Benedict and Ava, thank you so much. See you in 11.